the year 490 BC, an army came ashore on a quiet beach known as Marathon. But this was no ordinary force. This was the military power of the Persian Empire, one of the largest and most advanced armies the ancient world had ever witnessed. A force that marched under the command of a single ruler, the King of Kings, Darius the Great. Their mission was clear and ruthless: punish the city of Athens for daring to resist Persian authority. The Persians planned to march 26 miles to Athens and crush it into submission. Facing them was a much smaller force, citizen soldiers of Athens, outnumbered by at least 2 to 1. By every logical measure, Athens should have fallen. The city seemed destined to be just another addition to the Persian Empire's growing list of conquests. But events took a shocking turn. Instead of defeat, the Athenians achieved one of the most remarkable victories in military history. Their triumph was so decisive that it influenced the future path of Western civilization. So, how was this possible? How could a small democracy challenge such an immense empire and win? The answer lies in a story of long-standing resentment, 2 very different styles of warfare, and a chain of critical Persian mistakes that the Athenians exploited through one of the boldest battlefield strategies ever attempted. This is the story of why Persia fell at Marathon. To truly understand why the battle took place, we need to look back nearly 10 years before Marathon, to a group of Greek cities in a region called Ionia, located on the coast of present-day Turkey. These cities had been under Persian control for about 50 years. While the Persians were often known for practical governance, they ruled through local tyrants and demanded taxes and tribute. For the fiercely independent Greeks, this system never sat well. In 490 BC, long-standing resentment finally erupted. The revolt was sparked by Aristagoras, the tyrant of Miletus, who led the Ionian cities in open rebellion against Persia. Aristagoras understood, however, that he could not hope to defeat the Persian Empire on his own. Seeking support, he crossed the Aegean Sea to mainland Greece in search of allies. His first stop was Sparta, the strongest military power in Greece. Aristagoras presented them with a map, offering the promise of Persia's immense wealth. But the Spartans were cautious and inward-looking. When they learned that a march to the Persian capital would take 3 months, they refused. For them, the risk was too far from home. Disappointed, Aristagoras turned to Athens. This time, he changed his approach. Rather than appealing to wealth, he reminded them of their shared heritage, pointing out that Miletus had once been an Athenian colony. His message resonated deeply. Athens had only recently expelled its own tyrant and established a democracy. The chance to help their Greek kin escape a similar rule strongly appealed to them. Athens agreed to support the rebellion, sending 20 warships joined by 5 more from the nearby city of Eretria. In 498 BC, this combined Greek force launched an attack on Sardis, the regional Persian capital. They caught the governor, Artaphernes, completely off guard, seizing the lower part of the city. In the confusion, a fire broke out, spreading rapidly, and destroying much of Sardis, including a sacred temple. For the Greeks, it was a powerful symbolic victory, but their success was short-lived. On their retreat, a Persian army intercepted them and dealt a crushing defeat. When the Athenians realized the revolt was collapsing, they withdrew their ships and returned home, leaving the Ionian rebels to face their fate alone. By 494 BC, the uprising had ended, and Miletus was destroyed. For King Darius, however, the matter was far from finished. The role of Athens and Eretria, especially the burning of Sardis, was an insult he could never overlook. An attack on one of his capitals by foreign powers demanded a decisive answer. The ancient historian Herodotus tells a striking story of Darius's anger. According to him, the king fired an arrow into the sky, asking the gods for vengeance against the Athenians. He then instructed a servant to stand before him at every meal and repeat 3 words, "Master, remember the Athenians." From that moment, the conflict became more than politics or expansion. For Darius, it was personal. He intended to make Athens an example to all who dared to resist Persia. In the summer of 490 BC, his revenge began. A fleet of 600 ships commanded by Datis a seasoned admiral, and Artaphernes, the king's nephew, set sail. Their first target was Eretria, which they captured and destroyed as punishment for its part in the revolt. Next, the Persian fleet turned south and landed in a broad bay just 26 miles from Athens, the plain of Marathon. The location was chosen carefully based on the advice of Hippias, the former tyrant of Athens now allied with Persia. The plain was wide and open, ideal for the Persians' most dangerous advantage, their cavalry. What came ashore was an impressive show of imperial strength. While ancient sources often exaggerate numbers, modern historians estimate around 25,000 infantry and roughly 1,000 cavalry took the field. The Persian force that landed at Marathon was a well-organized combined arms army. Their battle plan was straightforward. First, waves of archers would release volleys of arrows intended to break enemy morale and scatter their formations. Next, the powerful Persian cavalry would charge into the weakened lines, overwhelming them completely. Finally, the infantry would advance to finish the fight. These infantry units were drawn from across the empire. They carried short spears and daggers, protected by large wicker shields. Quick and mobile, they looked effective on the surface, but, as history would show, this light equipment would prove to be a serious weakness. When the news of the landing reached Athens, panic spread through the city. Every available man was called to arms. This was not a standing professional army, but citizens, farmers, craftsmen, and traders, now preparing to defend their homes. To serve as a hoplite, each man had to equip himself with his own panoply. This included a bronze breastplate, shin guards, and the famous Corinthian helmet, which covered most of the face. The main weapon was a 9-foot spear known as the dory, backed up by a short sword for close combat. But the most vital piece of equipment was the shield, the aspis. Large, round, and made of wood faced with bronze, it was carried on the forearm and shoulder thanks to an innovative grip system. Crucially, the aspis wasn't designed only for personal defense. Its size and shape allowed it to protect the soldier standing beside you. This formed the basis of the phalanx. Hoplites stood shoulder to shoulder, arranged in lines, 8 men deep, creating a wall of overlapping shields and projecting spears. It was a formation built on discipline, unity, and trust, designed for one purpose: to smash directly into the enemy in brutal hand-to-hand combat. At Marathon, the Athenians could muster around 9,000 hoplites in this fearsome formation. The Athenians were not alone. They were joined by their only allies, the small city of Plataea, which sent every soldier it could, around 1,000 men. This act of loyalty would be remembered by Athens for generations. Even with Plataea's support, the Greeks were still badly outnumbered, at least 2 to 1. And the one ally they desperately needed, Sparta, was not there. A runner named Phidippides had made an astonishing 150-mile journey in just 2 days to request Spartan aid. The Spartans agreed to help, but not right away. They were in the middle of a sacred religious festival that forbade military action. They promised to march only after the full moon, which was still days away. At Marathon, Athens would have to face Persia on its own. The Athenian army advanced to Marathon and took up a clever defensive position in the surrounding hills, blocking the main roads that led toward Athens. From this high ground, they could look down at the vast Persian camp by the sea. For several days, nothing happened. The standoff was tense, but each side had different reasons for waiting. The Persian commanders, Datis and Artaphernes, believed they held the advantage. The open plain below was perfect terrain for their cavalry. They likely assumed the Athenians would either make the mistake of attacking across the plain, a suicidal move, or sit and do nothing while Persian agents worked to stir rebellion inside Athens. With Hippias, the exiled Athenian tyrant, by their side, some within the city might even have been tempted to welcome him back. This gave Persia time on their side. For the Athenians, things were much more uncertain. Their command structure was disorganized. Leadership was shared between 10 generals, one from each of Athens's 10 tribes, along with a war archon, a senior civil official named Callimachus, who held the deciding vote whenever the generals were split. According to Herodotus, the Athenian generals were evenly divided. Half of them insisted it was madness to fight without Spartan support, and argued they should wait. The other half, however, followed a general named Miltiades, who pressed urgently for an immediate attack. Miltiades was the ideal leader for this moment. An aristocrat with experience serving under the Persians, he knew their methods of warfare, understood their strengths, and, most importantly, recognized their weaknesses. He warned that delay was the real danger. The longer they sat at Marathon, the greater the chance that someone inside Athens might betray the city. In a passionate speech to Callimachus, the war archon, Miltiades presented the choice in stark terms: either slavery under Persia or a victory that could raise Athens to become the leading city in Greece. Callimachus was persuaded. With his deciding vote, the Athenians chose to fight. Even then, Miltiades held back. The generals who supported him handed over their days of command, effectively making him commander-in-chief. He waited, watching carefully for the right opportunity, because he faced one enormous problem: the Persian cavalry. The phalanx formation was powerful, but it was slow-moving and highly vulnerable to attacks on its sides and rear. That was exactly what cavalry was designed to exploit. Charging headlong at Persian archers and horsemen across the open plain would have been suicide. Then came the moment Miltiades had been hoping for. Scouts brought him stunning news. The Persian cavalry had disappeared from the battlefield. Historians still debate the reason. Perhaps they had been reloaded onto ships to threaten Athens by sea, or perhaps they had been sent off in search of water. Whatever the explanation, their absence gave Miltiades the chance he needed. The Persian cavalry was gone, and that absence turned out to be their fatal mistake. Without their horses, the one force that could have secured victory was missing. Miltiades knew this was his best and perhaps only chance. At dawn, he gave the command to advance, but his strategy was far from ordinary. Traditionally, a Greek phalanx was uniform across the line, about 8 men deep from one side to the other. Miltiades understood, however, that the Persians placed their strongest fighters, the native Persians and the fearsome Saka warriors, right in the center. If he kept a standard formation, his smaller army risked being surrounded and crushed. So he made a bold adjustment. He stretched his front to match the Persian width, but this required a dangerous compromise. He deliberately thinned his center, leaving some sections only 4 men deep. The troops he pulled from the middle were then shifted to the flanks. On the right flank, Miltiades positioned himself alongside Callimachus, while the left flank was reinforced by the entire Plataean army. Together, these wings became extremely powerful. It was a clever trap. By leaving his center visibly weaker, Miltiades practically lured the Persians' elite forces to attack straight into it. Meanwhile, his reinforced flanks were poised to smash through the enemy's weaker wings and then swing inward, collapsing onto the Persian center from both sides. It was a classic pincer movement, but its success relied on one critical risk. The Athenian center had to bend under pressure without breaking apart. As the sun climbed higher, the Greek line moved forward. Around 10,000 men, each burdened with more than 50 pounds of armor and weapons, began their march. Then when they reached the range of Persian arrows, Miltiades gave an order that shocked everyone: charge. The entire Greek army broke into a run. To the Persians, it must have seemed like madness. Heavy infantry, sprinting nearly a mile across, open ground with no archers or cavalry of their own to cover them. Yet this act of madness was exactly what turned the tide of history. At first, the Persians must have believed the Athenians were nothing more than a reckless mob throwing themselves into certain death. But the charge was brilliant. By rushing forward, the Greeks spent far less time exposed in the kill zone under Persian arrows. Most of those arrows clattered harmlessly against their bronze shields and armor. And second, that sudden charge gave the Athenians tremendous momentum, slamming into the Persian line with overwhelming force. The battle had instantly shifted into what the Persians least wanted: close quarters, face-to-face combat. On the flanks, the effect was devastating. The heavily armored Greek hoplites smashed straight into the lightly protected Persian levies. Their long spears punched through wicker shields and cut down men with little or no armor. The Persian wings collapsed almost immediately, breaking into chaos as soldiers fled in terror toward the ships. But in the center, just as Miltiades had feared, the fight was brutal. The elite Persian infantry, including the fearsome Saka, drove forward with relentless pressure. The thin Athenian center bent under the assault, forced into a grinding retreat. Step by step they gave ground, bending but never breaking. For a moment it looked as if the Persians might split the Greek line in two. And then came the turning point. With extraordinary discipline, the victorious Greek wings did not chase the fleeing enemy. Instead, they pivoted inward. In perfect coordination, they struck the exposed flanks and rear of the Persian center that had advanced so far forward. The trap was sprung. The best troops of the Persian army suddenly found themselves surrounded on three sides. The men who, only moments earlier, believed they were winning, now realized they were trapped. Order dissolved into chaos. Encirclement, the nightmare of any soldier, had become reality. Panic spread through the Persian ranks. The Persian center finally collapsed, and the entire army broke into a full retreat, scrambling in desperation toward the sea. What followed was nothing short of a massacre. The Greeks chased the fleeing soldiers relentlessly, cutting them down by the hundreds. Many Persians, in their panic, ran into the marshes on either side of the plain. There, trapped in the mud, they were cut to pieces where they stood. The fighting carried all the way to the shoreline, where the Greeks launched a furious attempt to seize the Persian ships. The struggle here was brutal. One Athenian warrior, Cynaegirus, is famously said to have grabbed hold of a Persian ship with his bare hand, only to have it hacked off by an axe. When the dust finally cleared, the numbers revealed the scale of the victory. The Greeks had captured 7 ships. On the battlefield lay the bodies of about 6,400 Persians. The Athenians, by comparison, lost only 192 men. The Plataeans, just 11. Among the fallen was the brave Callimachus, the war archon who had cast the deciding vote for battle. In recognition of their sacrifice, the Athenians buried their dead together in a great mound on the battlefield, a memorial that still stood as a symbol of their heroism. Yet even with this astonishing triumph, the danger was not over. The remainder of the Persian fleet did not sail home in defeat. Instead, it circled the tip of Attica, racing to strike directly at Athens, now left completely unprotected. The Persian cavalry, absent during the battle, was almost certainly aboard those ships, ready to support an assault, possibly even joining forces with sympathizers inside the city. Exhausted but determined, the Greek army knew there was no time to rest. Leaving a small guard behind to watch over the battlefield, the rest of the hoplites began a desperate forced march back to Athens. Their fight was not yet finished. After running a mile in heavy armor, fighting a savage battle, and chasing down a retreating enemy, the Greek soldiers now faced one last, almost impossible task. They had to march nearly 26 miles back to Athens as quickly as their bodies would allow. Exhausted but unbroken, they pushed on. They arrived just in time. As the Persian fleet appeared off the coast, ready to strike at the undefended city, the Persians saw a shocking sight. The same Athenian army that had crushed them at Marathon now stood ready once again for battle. Faced with the prospect of another fight against men who had already destroyed their forces, the Persians hesitated. Then one by one their ships turned back toward Asia. The invasion was over. Athens was safe. But the Battle of Marathon was far more than a victory on the field. It shattered the myth of Persian invincibility. For the first time, the world saw that the great empire could be beaten. That spark of confidence spread across Greece and would prove vital when Persia returned a decade later. For Athens, the triumph carried an even deeper meaning. It validated their entire way of life. It showed that a citizen army, farmers, potters, merchants, and free men defending their homes, could stand against the might of an empire. The victory gave Athens a surge of belief that fueled their golden age, a period of art, philosophy, and democracy that shaped the foundations of the Western world. The memory of that day still echoes in the marathon race, inspired by the legendary run of Phidippides. But the true legacy of Marathon is not measured in 2 miles. It is the timeless lesson that a small community of determined people, fighting, with discipline, courage, and a bold plan, can defy impossible odds and change the course of history forever.